Mission Black Vulture. The scorching sands of the desert, the night wrapped in darkness, and the atmosphere shaking with the echo of bullets. This was no ordinary war, this was a mission, the name of which would make the enemy's face turn pale. Operation Black Vulture. The secret operation, where trust is a weapon, and betrayal is more dangerous than death. There are no friends here, only the mission. And failure in this mission. There is only one word. Annihilation.
The tall trees surrounding the small—
Welcome back, everyone! It's me, and tonight we'll be reading from The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. It was a still night. The house was very quiet. Outside, the forest looked dark and endless. A cold wind blew through the trees, and the dry leaves made a soft rustling sound. In the drawing room of Hill House, a young boy named Arslan walked carefully from one end to the other, his heart beating fast and hard in his chest. But he did not care. He could not see much in the gloom anyway. From where he stood, the front door was lost in the darkness of the hall. He could not tell if it was open or shut, and he did not want to turn and look. He was afraid of what he might see. He had heard footsteps behind him many times during the last few minutes, heavy footsteps coming down the stairs, 10 stopping. Then they started again and came after him, always behind him. When he turned quickly, once, twice, 3 times, there was nothing there. The footsteps followed him into the drawing room and stopped again. For a moment Arslan stood perfectly still. He closed his eyes against the dark, trying to listen. When he opened them again, the room was still empty. He heard only the wind and the rain outside, and the footsteps were gone. He wanted to call out, to ask who was there, what he wanted, why he was being followed, but his voice would not come. He could not speak. He was too frightened. Slowly, he began to walk toward the hall again. The moonlight was brighter now, and he could see the white carpet on the floor. As he walked, he knew he should run, but his legs would not move fast. He felt as if someone were holding him, pulling him backward. He forced himself to go on, but he dared not turn to look. He kept his eyes fixed on the point between the door and the wall. All around him in the shadows, he could have sworn he saw shapes moving, but he did not stop. He did not dare stop. At last, he reached the door and stepped out into the hall. Moonlight laid in a long streak across the floor. He could see the top of the banisters ahead, and the darkness above them was deep and heavy. There was nothing in the hall. No one had followed him. The house was silent except for the wind and the rain, and the darkness was absolute. Arslan turned slowly and walked back to the drawing room. The fire had burned low, and the logs had died. The room was dark and cold. He stood by the window and looked out at the garden. Somewhere outside, a tree swayed restlessly in the wind. He wondered if it would be safe to go to bed, if he could sleep. He knew the other children slept alone in their rooms, but he never slept alone. Not since Nell had come to live at Hill House. When he turned from the window, he saw something lying on the rug in the middle of the room. He crossed the room and stooped to pick it up. It was a small, flat box wrapped in brown paper. He recognized it at once. It was one of the boxes that had been delivered that afternoon. The others had been Nell's things. This box had come after she'd gone to her room. He did not know what was in it. He did not want to find out. When he looked up from the box, he saw a white shape outlined against the dark window behind him. It was the moon, round and bright, shining directly on the floor. I stared at it mesmerized, while the white shape grew larger, until at last it seemed to touch him, and he screamed. The white shape rushed forward. He turned and ran to hide under the sofa. The shape glided past him, flowing and changing like water. He watched it go out the door and disappear into the darkness of the hall. Then he climbed out from under the sofa. He could not stay in the room. He had to find Nell. But when he hurried into the hall, he could not find her room. He did not recognize the high, dark walls, or the heavy, closed doors. He walked blindly down the hall, his bare feet whispering on the cold stone floor. At the end, he found a stair, took 2 steps, turned and ran back. He did not know what he was looking for, but he could not go back to the drawing room. That door was locked. He could hear the deadbolt click home. When he pressed his hand against the wood, he could feel the coldness of the lock and the smooth, hard surface of the knob. He cried out, "Nell, where are you?" Silence answered him. The only sound was the wind outside. And in the hall, the darkness pressed close against him. After a long time, he heard a noise behind him. He turned and saw the white shape gliding toward him. It floated past him, flowing and changing, and he called out Nell and ran after it. But the shape disappeared around a corner, and he did not know which way to go. He ran down the hall, then back again. Each time he turned, the darkness seemed deeper and colder, the silence longer and heavier. He could feel the walls pressing in on him, the corners reaching out to catch him. He tried to call for help, but his throat was dry and no sound came out. He was lost in a maze of dark, empty halls, and somewhere near him the white shape moved again. He could hear its whisperings, like the rustle of leaves in the wind, or like the soft beating of a bird's wings. He thought he might be going mad, or maybe he was already mad. He could not remember. Then he heard a new sound, a long, low moan, as if some great beast were sighing in the darkness. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It was the sound of the house, and it frightened him. He wanted to get away from it. He wanted to find Nell. As he ran blindly through the house, he came into a room at last. He did not know what was in it, but he went to the window and pushed it open. Moonlight flooded the room, and the fresh air struck him with a sharp chill. He could see the garden now, dark and wet and full of shadows. The trees swayed restlessly in the wind. Somewhere beyond the garden, something was moving, dragging itself closer and closer to the house. He went back from the window and looked around the room. It was bare, except for a rocking chair in the corner. The candle on the table flickered and cast long shadows on the walls. In the corner, rocking chair moved slightly, then stopped. The moonlight slipped through the window and touched the chair. It was empty. The candle went out. In the darkness, he could hear the wind and the rain. The floorboards creaked. Something moved in the rocking chair again. A bat, Hawaii, stumbling over rugs and furniture, falling against the wall. The floorboards creaked again, and the chair rocked slowly, steadily. He ran to the door and slammed it open. Outside, the wind caught at his clothes and pulled him out into the darkness. He ran along the wall and hid between 2 trees. He could see the lights of the house and hear the wind and the rain. The floorboard creaked again, and he cried out. He did not want to hear it anymore. He did not want to see the white shape glide past him in the moonlight. He did not want to hear the footsteps behind him or feel the icy hand on his shoulder. He did not want to see the glowworm in the darkness or smell the dampness of the earth. He stayed hidden between the trees until morning, when the sun climbed higher and the sky was filled with light. The wind had died down and the clouds had gone away. He could hear birds singing in the trees. The forest looked peaceful and still. He went back to the house. In the morning, the family ate breakfast in silence. No one spoke to anyone else. No one asked any questions. No one said anything at all. After breakfast, the children left the room and went out into the garden. They played quietly among the trees. Sometimes they looked at each as if they wanted to say something, but they never did. They played in silence. In the afternoon, the family sat together in the drawing room. The fire burned low in the grate, and the logs made a soft, crackling sound. The room was full of shadows, and the children watched the flames. No one said a word, but the silence was not heavy. It was easy. The darkness fell early that night, and the rain began to fall again. The wind rose, and the trees swayed restlessly. In the drawing room, Arslan and Nell sat close together on the sofa. They did not speak. They did not need to speak. The fire burned low in the grate. The clock ticked on the mantelpiece. Outside, the wind and the rain grew louder. On the hearthrug, they fired the aid.
All village looked dark and endless. The sky above was filled with stars, but their light couldn't reach down into the forest. A cold wind blew through the branches, making the leaves rustle softly. It was the kind of night that made people stay indoors by the firelight, telling stories to keep their minds off the shadows outside. But for one young boy named Arslan, the forest was his only option. He walked carefully along the narrow path, his heart beating faster and faster with every step. Every now and then, he thought he heard footsteps behind him. He would turn quickly, expecting to see someone there, but there was nothing but the darkness and the rustling leaves. Behind him, the full moon was hidden behind a thick layer of clouds, so the forest was almost completely black. There were no birds singing in the trees, and even the crickets seemed to be silent. All around him, the shadows were moving, stretching, and twisting as if they had a life of their own. They seemed to be reaching out for him, trying to pull him deeper into the woods. Arslan had heard the villagers' stories about this cursed forest. They told tales of people who never returned after entering it, of strange lights and sounds that drove you mad. He had always thought it was just an old wives' tale to scare children. But now, alone in the dark woods, he wasn't so sure. He tried to tell himself that there was nothing to be afraid of, that the stories weren't true. But even as he said those words, he couldn't convince himself. His mind kept playing tricks on him. Every time he heard a noise, he turned and saw a pair of glowing eyes staring at him from between the trees. Every shadow seemed to take on a life of its own, twisting and turning until it looked like some kind of monster. He could have sworn he heard a low growl in the bushes, but when he stopped and listened, there was nothing but the wind. The longer he walked, the deeper into the forest he felt he was going. The trees seemed to be closing in around him, blocking out the little moonlight that was left. The path ahead was getting darker and darker. Then suddenly, through the trees, he heard a loud scream. A woman's scream. It was chilling, desperate, and it echoed across the forest. Arslan froze, his body trembling as he listened closely. The sound seemed to come from the far side of the trees, but he couldn't be sure. He wanted to run, to get away from that sound, but his legs felt like they were filled with lead. He was frozen to the spot, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel his breath coming faster and faster, and he could feel tears welling up in his eyes. But he blinked them away. He wouldn't cry. He had to be strong! He forced himself to take a deep breath, trying to calm down. Then he started walking again, trying to put that horrible sound out of his mind. But it was no use. The deeper he went into the forest, the more he could hear. Sometimes it was a scream, sometimes a low growl, and sometimes what sounded like voices whispering in the dark. And every time he heard it, those glowing eyes would appear in the darkness, staring at him from the trees. Finally, after what felt like hours, the sound came again. Closer this time, and he could hear footsteps following close behind him. Panic surged through him, and he broke into a run. He didn't dare look back, but he could feel their eyes on him, watching him, waiting for him to stop. He didn't know where he was going, but he couldn't keep running forever. He could feel his lungs burning, his legs aching with exhaustion. He had to get away, to find somewhere to hide. Suddenly, he saw a light ahead. He didn't know whether it was real or just another trick of his mind, but he ran towards it anyway. When he got closer, he saw that it was coming from an old abandoned cabin hidden behind a thick wall of trees. The door was hanging off its hinges, but he didn't care. He pushed it open and stepped inside without even looking back. He had never been in this cabin before, but he could tell no one had been here for a long time. Dust covered everything, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. The air was damp and old, like no one had been here for years. The only light came from a crack in the wall, letting in a sliver of moonlight. He could hear the sound of footsteps outside, getting closer, but inside the cabin, he felt safe. Or maybe he was just too tired to run anymore. Slowly, he started to calm down, his breathing becoming slower and more regular. He looked around the cabin, trying to find somewhere to hide, somewhere the person or whatever was out there couldn't find him. He found a small space under a table by the wall. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He crawled underneath and stayed perfectly still. He didn't know how long he had been hiding there when the cabin suddenly shook slightly. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but then he felt the floor vibrate again. It was very faint, but definitely coming from outside. Then he heard a noise, a dragging sound like something heavy being pulled along the ground. It was coming from right outside the cabin. He could feel the vibrations in the floor, and he could hear the scraping of metal on wood. Whatever was out there was getting closer. He held his breath, trying not to make any sound. He squeezed his eyes shut, but he couldn't help peeking out from under the table. All he could see was the darkness, but he could feel the presence just outside the cabin, waiting, sniffing the air. Suddenly, he saw the pair of glowing eyes again. They were right outside the hole in the wall, staring straight at him. The eyes seemed to pierce the darkness, boring into him, and he could feel a cold draft pass over him, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. Whatever was out there took a step closer, and he could hear a low growl, a deep guttural sound that sent shivers down his spine. Then a cold hand touched his shoulder, and he screamed loudly. The sound echoed around him, bouncing off the walls. He could feel the presence tense outside the cabin, and then he heard a crash as something heavy fell to the ground. He was shaking, his whole body trembling with fear. He wanted to get out from under the table, to run away, but he couldn't. He was too scared. The darkness all around him seemed to press in, suffocating him. The wind howled outside, and the rain began to fall. He could feel the water dripping down the walls, making the floor wetter and muddier. Then he heard the footsteps again, coming closer. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the sounds. But he knew he couldn't hide forever. He had to face whatever was out there. When he finally opened his eyes, he could see the door in front of him, the one that had been hanging off its hinges. It was open now, revealing the darkness beyond. But the darkness seemed to be moving, taking shape in front of him. A tall, dark figure emerged from the shadows, and Arslan screamed again. The figure took a step closer, and he could see two glowing eyes staring at him. The eyes were cold, emotionless, and they seemed to burn with an eerie green light. The figure moved closer, and Arslan could see its face. It was pale and lifeless, with dark circles under its eyes and a twisted smile on its lips. Its hair was long and greasy, covering its face like a dark cloud. Arslan's mind reeled, trying to understand what he was seeing. He had heard the stories about ghosts in the forest, but he had never believed them. He thought it was just a story to scare kids. But now, he wasn't so sure. The ghost took another step closer, and Arslan could feel the coldness coming off it. It was like a grave chill that seeped into his bones. The ghost moved closer, and he could feel its presence looming over him, heavy and oppressive. Then it spoke, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to echo inside his mind. "Leave this place!" it said, "or you will be trapped here forever." Arslan tried to speak, but his throat was dry and his voice wouldn't come out. He wanted to run, to get away from the ghost, but he couldn't move. He was frozen in place, his mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. "Leave," the ghost whispered again, its voice growing louder, more insistent. "Leave now, before it's too late." And then the ghost took a step closer, reaching out a hand towards him. The nails on its fingers were long and sharp, like the claws of a beast. Arslan screamed and scrambled backwards, falling to the ground. He tried to get away, to run from the ghost, but the more he struggled, the deeper into the cabin he went. He could feel the presence all around him, pressing in, suffocating him. The ghost was getting closer, its icy fingers reaching for him. Suddenly, the candle on the table flickered and went out. The room was plunged into darkness, but he could still feel the ghost near him, its breath on his neck, its fingers digging into his clothes. He could hear the sound of its voice echoing around him, whispering, "You can't escape. You're trapped here now." A cold draft passed through the cabin, and he could feel the door slam shut by itself. The ghost moved closer, and he could feel its presence looming over him, cold and heavy. He tried to scream, to call out for help, but no sound came out. He was trapped in the darkness with the ghost, and he knew he was in terrible danger.